Hello, my name is Rickard, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you the major updates to Photoshop 2023. Adobe recently released Photoshop 2023, and with it, we get 4 really cool new features. The first is the Contextual Task Bar, the second is the Remove tool, and then we have adjustment presets, and finally, the new Gradient tool. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use those. Now, if you're interested in Generative Fill, that is not part of Photoshop 2023 yet. It is only part of the beta, and I have done a separate video on how to download the beta and also how to use Generative Fill. I'll include a link to that somewhere up there, as well as in the description of this video. Now, if you want to follow along, I have included the images that I used in a link in the description of this video. Go ahead, download those, and then let's dive into Photoshop. Okay, so if you go ahead and open Adobe Photoshop 2023, make sure you have the latest version, and then let's go to Open here, and in the Assets folder, I want to open this Zenu folder or a document from Unsplash. Let's go ahead and click Open. Now, the first thing you're going to see is this new Contextual Task Bar down here. If you don't see it, go up to here and go down to Contextual Task Bar. And what this is a new feature. It basically follows around your selection. So if you have no selection, then your entire canvas is your selection. But if you have a selection, the taskbar will appear directly underneath the selection. Also, if you are typing something, you'll see that the taskbar will appear under the text, and the taskbar will also change to reflect the tool that you're using. Let's go ahead and delete this layer, and I want to show you a couple other things with the Contextual Taskbar. So first, if you find this getting in your way, there's 2 things that you can do. One is you can go ahead and hide the taskbar, and then to turn it back on, you're going to go down here and turn it back on. Now, because I want to be able to turn the taskbar on and off at will, what I want to do is assign a shortcut to the taskbar. So to do that, let's go up to Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, and then let's go to Window, and then scroll all the way to the bottom of this, and we're going to see the Contextual Taskbar. Let's go right here and put in Option Command R. Now that's already in use, and it's going to be removed from Select, Select, and Mask. We can always get to the Select and Mask workspace from the Contextual Taskbar when we have any selection open. Also, we can click here to get to Select and Mask. So for me, I would rather have this be my shortcut for the Contextual Taskbar, just because it's very similar to Command R to bring up my ruler. So let's hit Accept and hit OK. Now with Command, Option, and R, I can turn that Contextual Taskbar on and off. Just like I can turn my ruler on with Command R, just add the option, and now I can turn my contextual bar on and off. The other thing that you might want to do is, if you do want to have ready access to the contextual taskbar, but you don't want it in the way of your image, what you can do is grab this little white bar on the left here, drag it to where you generally want it to be or want it to live. So for me, I would want it to live down here, and then click on the 3 dots, and you can click on Pin Bar Position. Now you will have to do this each time you open this version of Photoshop, because it doesn't remember it from the last time you did it. But that's something to note, and that's an easy way to keep the bar down here regardless of where your selection is or where you're typing. Now, what the Contextual Taskbar offers is access to the most common things that you might want to do. So for example, if I make a selection, Here I have the option of refining the selection or opening the Select and Mask workspace. Here I can invert my selection. And if we zoom out, you can see that this is inverting my selection. Here I can transform the selection. Now, usually you would have to right mouse click and go down to transform selection, but with the taskbar, you can simply click on this. And now you can transform your selection independent of your bitmap or your image. Once the transform appears, you'll notice that our taskbar now has changed again. Here I have the option of flipping vertically or horizontally, which is really helpful. Again, this just saves the time of having to right mouse click and do it down here. And I can either accept or abandon my transform. So I'm going to abandon the transform there. Here we have the ability to add a mask. Now I did notice that holding down Option doesn't change the mask behavior. So whether I hold down Option or not, it's always going to do the mask as a reveal what's selected mask. So if you wanted to do an inverted mask, like you can do by holding Option and clicking here, what you would have to do is first click on this and then click on your mask. And then here we have our adjustments, and this will simply bring up the adjustments panel, and we'll discuss these new adjustment presets in a second. Then here we have options to fill in our selections. So we can either do a contents aware fill, fill color or fill pattern, background color, and so forth. And then here we have our tools for the contextual taskbar, and then finally we have our deselect. So that's Command D on your keyboard, but now you also have this nice option when you have a selection, you can click on deselect. When you have nothing selected, you have the option of select subject, which you can see that's kind of struggling with this image to find what the subject is. Let's go ahead and deselect. And then here we also have the option of removing background, which will select subject and then add a mask to it. We also have the ability to adjust here our adjustment presets or adjustment layers. And then here we have transform. Now, because I'm on a locked background layer, that's not going to work. But if this is a normal layer, you'll see I have this option, and that'll bring up my transform. So those are all the options for the contextual menu bar. And again, by assigning a keyboard shortcut to that, we can use Command Option and R to turn our taskbar on or off, like so. Okay, so now that we have taken a look at the contextual taskbar, the next thing I want to cover is the new Remove tool. So first, let's go to our menu here, and if you go to our repair tools, which are all these tools, you're going to see that there's a new tool here called the Remove tool, and it's got the 2 stars. And the 2 stars are kind of what Photoshop are using to indicate generative AI, meaning AI that uses machine learning to take information from your image and from thousands of other images to determine what should be where in place of what you're removing. So you can almost look at this as a soft implementation of the Generative Fill, which is currently in Photoshop beta. Or you could look at it as a smarter, more powerful healing brush and patch tool. So let's first look at what I want to do here is I want to remove this tip jar. Now, in the previous version of Photoshop, my options would be the healing brush tool or the patch tool. So in this case, if I use the patch tool and made a selection around this to try to remove it, I would select it here and then maybe try to line up the top there. So something like this. You can see it did a decent job of blending, but obviously this doesn't look right. These lines don't look right. I would have to clean this up quite a bit, rebuild his head in order for this to be a usable image. So let's go ahead and undo. And now let's move to our remove tool. So for the remove tool, it's going to work very similar to the healing brush tool, meaning the way it works is you're going to paint over an area, and when you let go of your mouse, it'll process that command. So let's first deselect, and then I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and I can do that by holding Control and Option on my keyboard and then scrolling left and right. You can also use your normal shortcuts, your bracket left and bracket right, to change your brush size. All right, and then what we're going to do is start painting over the part that we want to get rid of, like this. And when I let go, it's going to process and remove that, and it's going to use AI to fill in what it thinks should be in the area where we've removed something. So let's go ahead and wait for this to process. And you can see that that actually did a halfway decent job of rebuilding his head shape here and also rebuilding this line, certainly better than the patch tool. Now we can go in here and try to clean this up as well. Maybe I'll just take a line here and remove this. Now, realize when you're removing this, Photoshop's AI is determining what should be in its place. So each time I draw, it's going to review the whole image and try to figure out what should be there. So we could do this, maybe draw this area like this. You can see that did a little bit of a better job on his hair there. And that looks a bit better. Let's go ahead and do this as well. You can see how by just painting the things that I want to remove, Photoshop's doing a really good job of kind of determining what I want in its place. And also, the smaller the area that you're getting rid of, the faster Photoshop will work. And the bigger the area, the longer it's going to take to process that command. So there you go. You can see we've gotten rid of all that. It looks quite realistic. Maybe I want to get rid of this reflection as well. I'm just going to draw this area. There you go. And then the other thing I might want to do with this image is just recrop it so it's a little centered. So let's go to our crop, and you're going to notice that this content aware is now added to our crop tool. And what this does is if we turn it on, and let's adjust our crop here. I'm actually going to set this to 4:5. And I want our main subject here in the center. Maybe I want to make it a little bit wider. So you'll notice here that we're adding a bit of pink. But because I hit Content Aware Fill, what it's going to do is it's going to use AI to try to fill in this area here. So let's hit the check mark. You can see here it's now working on filling this area. And there you go. It filled in that area with some pixel information. Now, the wider you do this away from your original, the worse your results are going to be. So I would say try to use this really for only small areas where you're not taxing the AI to try to build a lot of stuff. For example, if I went like this and hit the check mark, it's still going to try to process and fill in this information. It's just not going to do as good a job. And you can see there in these blank areas, it doesn't really know what to add. If you zoom out, it actually looks okay. I would probably clean up this area right here. Maybe I can go to my erase tool and just erase this part here and see if the AI can try to process this and come up with something better to put there. But in reality, you're going to be better off if you only make small changes using this feature with the content aware crop. Okay, so that shows you the contextual taskbar as well as the new remove tool. The other two new features in Photoshop 2023 are the adjustment presets and the gradients. So first, let's look at the adjustment presets. If we go here to our adjustments panel, you can also go to Windows Adjustments. You're going to see that in addition to the individual parameters, we now have these presets. Now, the presets are basically just a folder with one or more of these adjustments inside of them. So if I go to Portraits here and I hover over, you can see how that preset is going to affect my image. So you can see this is making it a little warmer. This is making it cooler. This is making it black and white. This is making it darker. And this is making it brighter. And you can see all these, and as you hover over them, you can see how that image is going to affect your actual document. So this, as it stands right now, you cannot create your own adjustment presets. And without that functionality, I don't find much use for the adjustment presets, only because all the things that they're doing, I can do quite easily just using the normal tools in Photoshop. Like if I wanted it black and white, I can easily invert the image and add a black and white layer to it. I don't need to use this preset in order to accomplish that. Here you can see some black and white options and then also some cinematic ones. So as it stands, I don't find this function very useful. Let's go ahead and click one of these. You can see that it added a color balance and then a brightness and contrast. I can achieve the same result just using a single curve. So for me, these adjustments aren't very useful right now. However, I do see a very good use for them in the future when Adobe allows us to create our own presets. This actually allows us to preview our color adjustments on our image without having to implement them. So those are the adjustment presets. These are a new feature that I think really wasn't very well thought out, because without being able to save our own adjustment presets, there's not much value to this addition. However, for new users or people who are really not experienced with Photoshop, this does allow you to, create warmth in your image without knowing how to use curves or color balance or anything like that. Okay, so those are the adjustment presets. The last thing I want to show you is the new gradients inside of Photoshop 2023. So for that, we're going to close this image and not save. All right, let's go to File, Open. And for this, we're going to use the Gradients Roy DNG file. Let's go ahead and hit Open. We already made the adjustments to this, so we'll hit Open again. First thing we'll do is just crop it. So let's go C for our crop tool. I'm going to put this on 4x5 and then adjust this so that he's centered in our frame. And cut him off just above the knees there. So something like this. And then here, let's go ahead and click on our select subject. And we could click here. I can go into the select and mask workspace. Let's zoom in here. Just make sure his face is nicely selected. Looks like we have a little bit to clean up. I'm going to go in the brush tool here and just paint in the rest of the nose there that got missed. And maybe paint out this part right there. And just paint in the eyebrow a little bit here. And I think that looks good. All right, let's hit OK. And Let's go ahead and add a mask. And then here, what I want to do is I want to create a background with a gradient. So let's go ahead and make a new layer, and we'll put this behind our subject. Now, if I go to the gradient tool, the first thing you're going to notice is that we have an option here for gradient and classic gradient. Now, if you've been using Photoshop for any amount of time, you're probably familiar with the gradient tool. And the normal gradient tool, or how it has been in Photoshop, has basically become the classic gradient. And with the classic gradient, that works just as it has in Photoshop. You can select your gradient color here or gradient type. And then from here, you can select either a linear gradient. And each time you do this, similar to a paintbrush, it's basically just overwriting whatever else was in that layer. So each time I do this, my gradient is overwriting the old one. Now, if my gradient has any kind of transparency, like this, foreground to transparent, each time I do this, it's just adding on top of whatever text information or whatever image information was already there. So like if I made my background black, it's going to change my gradient to black. And you can see as I do this, each time it's adding to this layer here. So that's the way the classic gradient has worked. Now, the new gradient introduces a bit of a different workflow for the gradients. So with this, when I add a gradient, it's actually going to add a new layer in my layer stack. And this gradient is going to remain interactive. So here in this case, if I tried to now add a gradient at the bottom, it's actually erased my previous gradient and just created a new one. Make this a little bit easier to see. Let's go ahead and change our layer 1 here. I'm going to just fill it in with white. So let's go to white here, and we can do Option and delete. So now our background is white. So now if I select my gradient again, right away you'll notice that when I selected the gradient layer, this gradient is actually completely interactive. I can change the shape of it, the length of it. If you've used Illustrator, this is kind of how the gradients work in Illustrator, meaning they're very interactive. I can change here the color. Now, this one isn't great. Let's select a more colorful gradient. And you'll notice here, I don't have to redo the gradient. It'll just apply those colors to my existing gradient here. So this is also a great way if you want to just try different colors. You can first set your gradient how you want it, and then just change the colors. Another good example here is I can also change this to a radial gradient. Maybe put this where I want the center of my gradient to be, so somewhere here. And then I could try different colors. So like this, get a color that I like here. And now to make another gradient, so let's go back to our linear gradient. Let's say I wanted to make another blue gradient coming in from the left here. Well, if I start doing this or this, you can see that it's just overwriting my previous one. So to do this, what I would have to do is hold down Shift and then do another one. And you can see, because these have no transparency, each one is just sitting on top and hiding the one below it. But let's go ahead and select all these and apply this gradient to them. Now you'll notice it only applied it to the top one, but if I go in here and apply it to all these, and let's go ahead and change our background to black. We'll just do Command-I to invert it. You can see here now that these are, each one is on top of and overlaying and adding more white to this scene. So when you're doing gradients and you want to add more than one, hold down Shift and that'll add another gradient layer. Now, if you collapse these two layers, they become pixel layers you obviously can no longer adjust the interactive gradient. So if you want your gradients to remain interactive, use the new gradient tool. If you want your gradient to behave similar to how the gradient has applied in the past, then switch to the classic gradient. One other thing I want to show you here, let's go ahead and delete all these. And let's add one gradient here. I'm going to do a radial. We'll just do maybe this one here. I'm going to reverse it so that my light color is in the middle. Do something like this. And I'm going to double click on this dark color here and make this darker. Something like that. And then maybe move this so that our hotspot is a little bit smaller. Maybe make this a little bit darker too. So something like that. Okay, the next thing I want to do is show you how this new gradient tool works on a mask. So for that, let's go ahead and just go to File, Place Embedded. I'm going to grab the moon JPEG and put that behind him. Let's move it up to about where we want it. So about there. I'm also going to rotate it like so. Yeah, just minus 90. Okay, and then we're going to put this on screen. And then I'm going to add a mask to it. Now with my mask selected, I'm going to go onto my gradient tool. And here I'm going to keep it on gradient, not classic gradient, but I'm going to change it to foreground to transparent, make it linear, and then hit D and then X so that my foreground color is black. I'm going to turn off the reverse. And then let's start from the bottom left here and move up to the top left. So bottom right to top left. You can see here that this is making our mask transparent down here and then not transparent up here. Now I can adjust this. I can move this so that more of the moon is transparent. I can also adjust this. Now you'll notice this is not adjusting anything, and that's because this is adjusting color. And right now my color is black on both ends. The only difference is actually the opacity. So to affect that, I would have to go into my properties here. And you'll notice here that I have opacity control. So I can move this more toward the right. And you'll notice that's now affecting the transparency there. The nice thing about this is because it's interactive, I can move this around, see what looks best. But let's say I like it here, but I want to add another mask so that this part of it is a little more hidden. Now, when you're working with layers, I would hold down Shift and add another mask. But when you're working with add another gradient. But when you're working with a mask, you don't need to hold down Shift. As you do a new gradient, it's going to add on top of your existing ones, similar to how the classic gradient works. The only difference is that whatever the last mask is that you made will remain an interactive mask until you add another one. Now this obviously is way too dark, so I would basically just start again if I didn't like the way my mask was. But that's how it works. Again, when you're working on a mask, only the very last gradient that you did will remain an interactive one. The rest will all be embedded into the mask. So like if I do one here, I can no longer access the one that's here. This is the only mask that I'll be able to interactively work with. So that is the new gradient tool. Again, if you want to have the previous behavior, you can always switch it back to classic gradient. I would get used to the new gradient and then just get used to the behavior so that when you're using Photoshop, it works how you want it to work. But that's how to use the new tool. So there you have it. Those are the 4 most significant new updates to Photoshop 2023. Hopefully in the course of this, you learned some tips, tricks, and techniques that you can use in your own workflows. Now, if you're interested in learning Photoshop and becoming a true master at it, I recommend my Photoshop Masterclass, which is part of our Nucly Photoshop Academy. You can check that out in the link in the description of this video. Please subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, leave a comment, share this video, do all that good stuff. And here's some other tutorials to check out. I will see you next time.